Good morning, good morning, good morning. Once again, as you heard in the other video, the initial video for today, we are working with adding and subtracting fractions, okay? We are working with adding and subtracting fractions. That's our topic for today, and here's your guided lesson. Now, although on your screen you see 6 problems, I'm only going to do 2 because it's just a guided practice, all right? And if this is something that you can refer to if you need help, if you get stuck, or if you just need a simple reminder, all right? So I'm going to do one addition problem and one subtracting problem of fractions, okay? That way you will have something to refer to if you get stuck or need help. Um, I'm gonna do number one, and if you know we talked about adding and subtracting of fractions, you know that in order to add or subtract fractions, your denominator must be the same. So if I look at problem number one, my denominator is not the same. I have a 3 and I have a 2 in my denominator. I have a 3 here and a 2 here. All right. So I got to get my denominators the same before I can even attempt to add them, because if I add them without changing the denominator, I'm not going to come up with the right answer. So our first step is to line them up vertically. All right, line them up vertically, because I think that sets the problem up easier for you to solve. So if I have 2 over 3 plus 1 over 2, or 1/2, 2/3 plus 1/2, mathematically correct. Um, Now I need to get my denominators the same. Um, I have them lined up vertically. So my next step is to get my denominators the same. Well, what I like to do to get my denominators the same is I like to multiply by the opposite denominator. So what I do is I take this fraction right here, the top fraction, and I'm going to multiply this fraction by the opposite denominator, which is the 2. Okay? So I'm going to multiply this fraction, the whole fraction, top and bottom, because you cannot do something to the top that you don't do to the bottom, and you can't do something to the bottom that you don't do to the top. So I'm going to multiply the top and then the bottom of this fraction, the numerator and the denominator, by 2. Then I'm going to come to this fraction and I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator of this fraction by the opposite denominator, which is 3. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Multiply this one by 2 because 2 is the opposite denominator, and I'm going to multiply this one by 3. Now, if you take a look at our denominators, our denominators have the same problem now. 3 times 2 and 2 times 3, which is tomato, tomato. Same thing, just written differently. And that's going to cause us to come up with the same denominator. That's why we multiply by the opposite fractions denominator. So when I multiply that, I end up with, up here, 2 times 2 is 4, and 3 times 2 is 6. That's 4 over 6. At the bottom, I have 1 times 3, which is 3, and 2 times 3, which is 6. All right. So now I can just add them how I want to add them. Numerators, you add the numerators, your denominators do not change. When you are adding and subtracting fractions, once you identify or create like denominators, that denominator is now your denominator. It doesn't change. So I don't add 6 and 6. 6 is just my denominator. So 6 is my denominator, and 4 plus 3 is 7. And that's my answer. All right, so we multiply by the opposite fractions denominator. Multiply by the opposite fractions denominator. All right, and even though this is an improper fraction, we're not going to go into changing it to or converting it to a mixed number just yet. Excuse me. Now our next one, we're going to do a subtraction problem, which is this one right here. 3/4 subtract 1/3. And I'm going to come over to the side over here where I have a little bit more room. 3/4 subtract 1/3. All right, and once again, I want to multiply by the opposite fractions denominator. So here I am. I'm going to multiply this one by what? 3, because 3 is the denominator of my other fraction right here. 3 is the denominator of this fraction, so I'm going to multiply the top fraction by that. And I'm going to multiply the bottom fraction by what? By 4. By 4. because 4 is this fraction's denominator, so I'm going to multiply this fraction by that. So when I multiply straight across, I come up with 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 3 is 12, and then I have 1 times 4 is 4, 3 times 4 is 12. All right, and one of the main things to remember is what operation is being applied. So as you remember, we are subtracting these. And once again, my denominator do not change, okay? It doesn't change. So my denominator, now that it's 12, it remains 12. And now, since it's subtraction, I'm doing 9 subtract 4, which is 5, and that's my answer. So step 1, line them up vertically. Step 2, multiply each fraction by the opposite fraction's denominator. Step 3, add the numerators, bring over your denominators. And step 4 is to do whatever operation it's asking you to do. Subtract or add and keep the denominator the same.